Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the episode 6 of Model Railroading Empires, how we build them. This episode, we're covering ground cover, 3D ground cover and 3D scenic details, as in static grass, foam, products we like to use, and basically how we use them. Me, I use a combination of ground foam. Try to get over here. And static grass, the clump foliage, and reindeer moss. I also use another product called Excelsior. I was actually trying to get my locomotives out of the way so I can get you in there and see before the show started, and I didn't have enough time. So let's see if I can get them moved here. Come on. There we go. I've got reindeer moss right here, clump foliage, static grass, and I put down ground foam first. Then I'll put down the static grass. I've got knock static grass. I've got woodland scenic static grass. And then I've got some flocking from woodland scenics that I use through my static grass applicator. So I've got 2mm medium dark green, 2mm dark green. I've got the black fine turf for soil. I've got a blended turf. And I've got the static grass flocks in dark green, medium green, and light green. And I'll actually blend them all together. And I've got some different plant hues. And some flowers that I have yet to put on yet. I'm going to sprinkle them on in some different spots. Give some different flowering effects. Go ahead and get you in a little closer to what I've got. Let you see the effects that it gives. By blending them, you don't always get one solid collar. Is that too low? Yep. Drops down. There we go. So as you can see, you get some different blends of color in here. Going along. And then right back there, that's where those cattails are that Excelsior that I use. And what it does, it comes in a big ball and I string it out. And then when I string it out, I straighten it out, cut off little sections of it, stick them in some white Elmer glue, stick them down in a hole in the layout. And then I've got some other products that I bought. Those pre-made at hedgerows from Michael's. I've got some trees that I've made out of wire. Not sure if I can get you in to see it or not here. There's a little bitty wire tree right there. Made out of wire and then made with coated with latex, liquid latex. Then I stretched some polyfill over top of it, static grass, and flocking. but most of my bushes are all clump foliage and reindeer moss. I've built my own static grass applicator, which I think we've talked about before on other episodes and different shows. There's plenty of YouTube videos on how to make them. They're fairly simple. It's a $5 bug zapper, electric bug fly swatter from Harbor Freight or Walmart. Another product that I have to use, and it's actually what I use, and not really Polyfill, but it's the same product as Polyfill. It's artificial spider web, and it's already dyed green. It's in the camera here. Not tearing anything up. So you just stretch it out real thin, and you can do the same thing you can do with the Polyfill. You can spray it down with spray adhesive, similar to the Elmer's glue, spray glue, and you can attach anything to it. Another product that I use, and Andy will probably cover a little bit more, is I use some natural products of sand, granulated sand. I've got some dirt that I filtered out, ran a magnet through, but I mainly, for natural, I just use the sand. And I'm trying to find, for attaching like figurines and stuff and my bushes, I either use the white glue or I'll use Eileen's or Hobby Tack. Andy, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you because that's about all I've got on my stuff for right now. I know you've got a little bit better setup going on tonight. So,
well, I've got a bunch of different products, so I'll go ahead and flip my camera down too and show you a bunch of things I've got that I'm gonna move them out of the way. Show you guys kind of, there's a lot of people done static grass, and there's not a whole lot of point in covering it because what I do is pretty similar to most people, but I have a couple little techniques that I do that are slightly different. But there's a lot of different three-dimensional. The key to that is, and last season we basically covered dirt. And I've got a little piece that I shaved off the back of a module that I've reduced in depth by a couple inches. And I had a little piece left over that's perfect for showing you my technique for static grass. The good old fashioned, the move in modern scenery techniques is in three-dimensionality. We've had ground foam or sawdust before that for the 100 years that this hobby has been a hobby. The three-dimensional things were basically trees, a little bit of bushes, some clump foliage, and this stuff, which is the Woodland Scenics, this is a different brand, but the same stuff, is that Polyfill. This is what you would think of as one of the earliest kind of three-dimensional scenery techniques. Other than structural scenery is this Polyfill that's stretched super thin. You get it in a big ball and stretch it out super thin. This is pretty good with some leaf flake. Of course, you can put ground foam on it too for certain things. I don't use this a lot. I found it to be one of the better base techniques for producing kudzu vines. But I use this and a few other components to make kudzu with, and maybe we'll cover that in the future more in depth. But I want to show you the base of these things, and then get into some quick depth of how I kind of do it. Briefly, I want to cover a couple of the things that I use that are kind of critical to doing 3D scenery, in my opinion. I use Mod Podge. We've talked about this before, and light's not great on that, but Mod Podge matte. It's not shiny like white glue is, although that may not be a problem for you. And then I keep, I like these little ketchup mustard dispensers, and I keep some of it diluted. The new stuff I showed probably last season is I don't use soap suds. I use this laboratory-based surfactant, or it increases the wetness of water or lowers the surface tension. I didn't bring that in here, but if anybody needs it, they can send me an email to us. I also use this stuff from Beacon. This brand is called Fabri-Tac, but Beacon makes Fabri-Tac and they make a 3-in-1 adhesive. This stuff is the closest stuff to hot glue without being hot that I know of. It's very similar to hot glue in the way that it behaves. It's really good for larger products and bushes. And then I use Eileen's like everybody else does, but I really love this Eileen's clear gel tacky glue. Again, it's really good for doing bushes and stuff like that. Um, Most of those are available just anywhere. None of those are hobby specific exactly. And also, I'll use Weldwood DAP contact cement. That's what I make trees with. I showed it on the NMRAX channel when I made my trees, and I've showed it on our channel some years ago on making trees. I use this diluted with methyl ethyl ketone or MEK diluted and kept it there. The one that I use that is hobby specific is that Scenic Express tacky glue. Um, that has a different behavior to anything else that I know of. It's super thick, and I use it for certain material. Yeah, that's all there is. But Scenic Express Tack E Glue, TAK-E-glue. It's a good one that's only available in the hobby press. I'd like to know what it's actually made of, um, but it's kind of a middle of the road between like an Eileen's or a Beacon 3-in-1. How thick that stuff is to how much more loose the Mod Podge is. Now, of the scenery elements, I use a bunch of things. Most of these are natural products. I use Scenic Express parts. You know, these are little pieces of Scenic Express trees with leaf flake on them. I use that for bushes and shrubbery. Some of these little natural moss products. This is a natural moss, but I can rip that apart into little strings, basically. I really like working with that. This is called, I make pine trees with this, or conifers. This is I think this one is the asparagus fern. I think that's what this is. Um, but I also use, this is the stuff Woodland Scenic sells that's ground foam put on a mesh. I don't love this so much, so I've went to using a few other things to replace it. This looks good to me. It looks good in the background, in the distance, as does ground foam in general. But I've went and I make some of these with leaf flake on the Polyfill product as well. And then I've went to using a lot of grass mats lately. This is a Hecky, I believe. It might be a knock, but it's basically a static grass put onto a thin, I forget what that is, but it's like a resin material that's semi-flexible. You can tear it into pieces that have rough edges on it, and I use that in places. So if I'm doing manicured lawns or extremely dense static grass or standing grass, I typically use grass mats as the main component of that, and I'll use static grass for filling in. Or if I want it to be fairly sparse, like out in the mountains along the right of way, it's very little spotty of dirt and grass, like this module that I have behind me here. And I'll move the stuff out of the way after we apply some static grass so you can see this somewhat completed scene that I've got. I also use natural root material. This is grass roots. You can get it off various vines, but I use these natural root for various things. It works really good along waterways as well. I've also kept all the scraps off that as well, and I keep those in a tin. They make some of the best underbrush, forest undergrowth that I use along the tree line. So there's another one that I can never seem to remember the name of. It used to be really popular. A lot of the guys that I used to follow many years ago that built spectacular trees back when all you seen was puffballs, these guys used to make trees out of this stuff. And I'll remember what the name of it is and post it on the channel, but I cannot think of what it's called right now. It's like something bush, but it's pretty spectacular. And I cut it into little pieces, into small pieces, and use it for small growth. Um, Also, I've used for a few of the things that are kind of hard to solve for. I've went to using some of these laser cut um, pieces. I think this is a knock. It's one of those. This is a fern. Here's some of the vines. You'll never be able to see them on the webcam, what they look like. They're really quite spectacular. But I cut them into pieces and glue them back together in place to make ferns. Ferns are critical to modeling Appalachia along water right-of-ways and stuff. I don't use a whole lot of, what quote unquote reindeer moss. The stuff that we always grew up with, the lichen stuff, is really brittle. I mean, it turns into dust basically every time you touch the stuff. The
Yeah,
natural reindeer moss. is
So
more
are the reindeer
rubbery.
balls. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
the reindeer balls you get at Hobby Lobby or something is much more rubbery and flexible. So I don't mind this stuff. I like it for along the back edge for tree and bushes. Another thing that I wanted to briefly cover that has to do with three-dimensional scenery, but I was going to cover it in our backdrop special. We'll try to cover that next season when we talk more about backdrops and painting backdrops, etc. Is I use this? What is this again, Tim? This uh, scouring pad,
Scouring pad.
a Scotch Brite. It's a Scotch Brite pad, and I rip them along the edges to make what looks like a rough forest line, and I'll use that along the back edge where the mountain scenery, where the forest scenery meets the backdrop. So in my case, where my layout's at eye level, you're looking up through the tree line. This keeps you from having a straight line where you're meeting the backdrop. So I'll do this where I meet the backdrop. Of course, I'll paint it and dust it with ground foam or something. You also get some natural little things. This is some flowers that came off from a natural plant. No idea what they're called. But if you look at all the various natural plants, these are great for um, like landscape in a yard for a planted bushes or something. Like this stuff from Knock. This is really good. This is just leftover little pieces I have. I've got so many of these different things that I keep a. I've got several of these trays like this with different pieces in them and stuff. As I'm working, I work with so many different individual pieces that I keep these things around so that I can work with them. And I'm gonna swap a few over. Also, this stuff is goat hair. I think it's got Woodland Scenic sells it as whatever long stuff. It's a goat hair, I believe. I think that's what Miles told me it was. Comes out of Russia. I'm real fond of it to work with, but you need some pretty decent techniques to actually use it correctly. So it'll require some practice to get that to work right. I've also started making bushes. Um, the Some of the best grass mats on the market are Martin Welberg. I really love his products, and you should look at Scenic Express or just look online or at his YouTube channel. Martin Welberg has some of the great stuff. Well, years ago, he showed a technique for making bushes, and I've got quite a few of them on my layout. And I just take a piece of sisal twine or rope, cut the little piece, stick it down in some Fabri-Tac or Beacon 3-in-1 glue, and then split and peel the edges apart, and then dust it with some 4 or 7 mil static grass, spray bomb it brown, and dust it with some leaf flake. I've been real happy with those as well. So that's just a whole bunch of material, but I want to show you a couple of the techniques I've got working with static grass that I found that work pretty well for me. So, like Tim, I use most of the static grass brands. My favorite is probably Mini Nature, the Silflor grass. I really like it. These are the new Woodland Scenics grasses. I have some of their older static grass. This stuff, I use this for, it's like 2 millimeter. And because I don't like making manicured lawns and stuff, I use this to fill in when I'm doing the straw or the grass, because I'm modeling spring. So what you'll have is the long, tall brown grass with some fresh green grass cropping up underneath it until it wipes that dry stuff out. This stuff has a lot flatter color to it. It's not as bright, and I never liked the Woodland Scenic static grasses because they had that real flat color to it. Until they come out with this new line of static grass products, I really love this product. It has a variance in color, especially what they call light green. It has a variance in color. So what I was doing before to get that variance was I was using the straw color just about all the time and using an airbrush with ink in it and basically staining it, using my little Badger whatever single action brush to spray a very dilute mixture of ink in it. And this stuff is a polyester. It's a rayon fabric or polyester fabric that's attracted by, I think it's rayon. It's attracted by the static grass applicators. And I really like this new Woodland Scenics product. I'm really quite fond of it. Um, so, so I've got a couple of the colors that I'm going to use, and I've got a piece of this module. I also have that flowering material. I really like this dark green stuff because it does a really good job of emulating those long straws that you see every hillbilly in every movie stuck in their jaw. It has those little beads on the ends of it. This is great for that. It's my favorite. So I've got a piece that I'm going to show you. Now, there's every use in the world for a straight traditional static grass applicator, the way the knock applicator works. Um, I intend to probably build one of those or something at some point. So far, I've always worked with these little things since I built one of these. I've had two or three of these I've built and modified over the years. Um, they're super handy, and they let you do something that I'm about to show you that I can't do with a traditional knock applicator. With the knock applicators, you have to apply them with a shaking action, and I don't do that. I prefer being able to pitch grass in of different colors and apply that variance of colors as I want. So I will do what we did on a show last season when we covered ground foam. This has or when we covered ground cover. This is dirt and ground up leaf, or it's the leaf product from Scenic Express. Actually, it holds the color better than natural leaves. And I've got some exposed dirt where it looks like a waterway should, or some wet ground should be, where I'll have some green grass here, and I'll have more yellowing grass as you get to the edge. The beauty of this thing is that you can pitch these different colors of grass into it actively. So I'm gonna just get a wet mix of glue down, and I typically use it full strength especially if it's got any bit of a hillside to it at all. If it's a flat area, I'll use a little bit wetter mix, or I'll put a little bit of water in it, and I'll put a few drops of dish detergent or something if it's flat. But for the most part in these areas, I'll apply it full strength because I want it to be tacky. You also need to experiment with your glue if you're not using Mod Podge. Some glues have a skin on them, especially Elmer's. They kind of skin over, and the glue has a hard time breaking the surface tension of the glue if you let the glue set very long. In that case, you'll either want to water it down, which you probably will anyway with an Elmer's, or you'll want to put a little bit of dish soap and stuff in it to remove that surface tension so that it doesn't skid over so easy. And you can put little drops of grass along the edge, of glue along the edges, and then kind of fill it in. One of the things I really love about Mod Podge is it does not skid over. At least it does not skid over very quickly. So you have some time to work with it after you put it down. Often I actually like to let it sit 2 or 3 minutes. Of course, if you're covering a very large area, that's going to happen anyway. And then your static grass applicator, a needle, or something like that. I also have a little tool for this. I put an alligator clip on mine. A lot of them come that way anyway, but I really like that. But I have a little tool that I put a rubber handle on an awl, on a little awl, so I can just hold it down when I'm spot working. So the thing that I do that might be a little bit unique, or I hadn't seen anybody else do it, is I pitch grass in as I want to, and I use a skewer to stir it to go through the machine. So it's on, and I'll pitch grass in since I want that to be, I want to control this. And there's a few companies, War World Scenics, WWS, I think, sells an applicator that has that's kind of for precision work. But you can do precision work with just a T-strainer if you're just pitching the grass in. The joy of that is you can fade colors together by pitching different colors in as you work, and then where you stir the grass is where it's going to go through the machine at. So you can blend from one color to another more easily. I've used a couple different ones, but I've made, I think, 3 of these machines. Maybe in some small part due to the fact that my wife got a hold of one asking what it was, and it got her pretty good one time. That was a good joke and a good laugh amongst everybody who was hanging out in the nightly chat that evening. I don't think she enjoyed it very much, but they do fly.
Yeah, considering it went flying across the room, I don't think she enjoyed it very much.
No, and they do fly pretty good. That is, I did say that. So, but one of the great things about this particular one is it has these Mickey Mouse like ears on it. One of the things you need to do is apply the static grass. Again, it's often better if you have a little bit of working time between each application, but is put it down, and then this thing, especially with these knobs on it, but you can use the edge of your strainer to kind of pull the static grass. And you can do a couple different things with this. One, you can pull static grass along to areas, where you'll have some extra on here. You can pull it along to fill in areas or to get over spots. And what I do is use it like I'm blending wet paint. And I'll pull back and forth across where I had that green grass here and the yellow grass on either side. And I'll pull the grass across that spot. one, that's forcing it into an upright position. Also, think about the way grass grows toward the sun. So if you have grass back under trees, it may actually be pulled out a little bit. But in this area, your grass is going to be going, this is a slight hillside, it's going to be growing up. So you want to pull your grass upright. In order to do that, I typically go like left to right along the hillside. So every time I'm touching the grass, I'm pulling it into an upright position. But it also helps you blend some of the green into the yellow the way it naturally occurs. So you don't get these, these spots of that. And then you'll get this, of course, I don't think the webcam's ever going to do it justice, but then you'll get, upright grass. And that's 4, I believe that's all 4 millimeter, with some 2 millimeter green of the more flat stuff blended in so that you can see green coming up through here. In person, you can really see the color variances where camera doesn't do, that novelty as much justice. And then I want to let that set up and let the glue set up for a little bit. But what I'll do afterwards, and I don't necessarily need to show that off, what I'll do after I've stood it, after it's set for a little bit, is I'll go back over it with a vacuum cleaner, and I'll do that relatively quickly. I would do that, say, 30, 45 minutes. Give your white glue or mod, in my case, and you'll want to experiment, depending on what type of adhesive, how quickly it skids over. I like to pull it before the glue dries, but after it skids over. Mod Podge takes about 45 minutes to an hour to do that. So I'll give it about 30 or 40, 45 minutes, and then I'll pull a vacuum cleaner or shop vac over it. And what I do is cover the end of it with a lady's stocking and stuff it up in the end of it. So as I pull it over it, I'm collecting that grass. And I have another one of these little bins that has that some green, some yellow grass in it so that I can reuse it. The only disadvantage to using the multiple colors is I've got a mix that'll have, 2 or 3 or 4 different static grasses in one bin. But that's the one thing I do that's slightly unique to other people is that application technique. And it works really well with these home built jobs that are built out of, these are $1. I think I bought like 10 of these things for $1 a piece. But you can regularly find them for $2.50 or something at Walmart. At a T-Strainer. It's a joy that it runs on batteries. I do intend to build a much more powerful one, but unless you're doing larger than 6 millimeter grass, and 6 millimeter grass is, nearly 2 feet tall. So unless you're doing something much taller than that or working at a larger scale, the 6 millimeter, now what I do 7 millimeter grass, which is technically 2 feet tall, for some fields of grass. This applicator will do 7 millimeter grass. It does really well with 4 millimeter, which is why I showed that off tonight. It would do great with 2 millimeter grass. 4 millimeters about a foot tall at HO scale. 2 millimeters, 6 inches, give or take. It works great for those. If you're working at a larger scale, or if you want to stand up 10 or 12 millimeter grass, you're likely going to need a more powerful static ion generator than what's built into this little machine. But this thing does the job. It does it pretty well. And that's the uniqueness of static grass that I work with.
A note on the safety on those static grass applicators. When you're using it, stay away from your ground probe or your contact probe, because otherwise it'll zap that. And avoid touching either end of it, because you may get a good shock from it.
Or breaching the gap between the two, or between the static grass machine and the wet surface and your wet glue. But it's not a very bad zap if you're anticipating it. If you don't know what the machine is, like my wife did, that was probably pretty rough since it was so unexpected. But these can't do much to you. They're not very, few thousand volts.
It's still a nice little shock and a surprise when you're not ready for it.
Yep.
And also make sure you discharge. When you're done working, you go ahead and discharge it by touching your probe to your screen. Because that way you don't get a surprise later on, because it'll hold charge for quite a while after you've pressed the button. And Andy was talking about the that ivy. What was that called, Andy? Touch through.
Yeah, kudzu vine. It's actually pretty hard, and it takes me like 2 or 3 different things. I use uh, string or a really fine a thread pulled up and through because kudzu is a vine and it has these arches of leaf structure. So I use like a thread pulled through that um, that stuff we were talking about, that furnace filter type material,
Yeah,
and I'll pull thread through that and then cover it in leaf flake.
that's sort of what I've simulated on the side of that building. Is just an ivy or kudzu uh, climbing the side of that building right there, and that's with that fake spider web material sprinkled with some ground foam and a little bit of static grass.
Well, I've got 2 things that I like really well too for doing like hanging vines as well. This natural moss material, which again, mosses have different names, and I'm not sure what it's called, but I pull it apart into strings, into threads, and it's really quite phenomenal for a very coarse vines. For really fine vines, like flowering vines, this laser cut material, these are laser cut, again, from Knock or one of those manufacturers. They're laser cut vines. If I was doing something like flowering vines on a front porch of a structure, I would use these for vines growing along the forest floor. I use this natural moss and just pull it into strings and threads. But you can't go
What
wrong with that stuff you're using as well.
what is the leaf flake material? What brand is that you're using, Andy?
What I use a bunch. My favorite has been Selkirk Leaf, but apparently they've went out of business recently or something. Their website's not active. They were a company out of Canada that only made leaf flake, and I loved Selkirk Leaf. Suppose I still do, but I don't mind the Knock stuff is pretty good. I'm happy enough to use the Knock leaf flake. The only problem I have with Knock is it's all one size, and I know that won't matter to a lot of people, but I actually really like doing like. Forced perspective by using ground foam at the back of my seed. This seed that's here behind me, this module that's built here, along the back edge of this is okay. The back edge of this, which I don't have a backdrop on it, it's just the module in here. But the back edge of these trees are all the small leaf flake. I've even got some. Um, I forget what it is. That bush that everybody uses. That I don't like it very well actually, but it makes good canopy trees. Um, but I grow it myself so I can make some of it. It makes good canopy. I'll think of what it's called in a minute. And the rest of it's just super tree. But I use, since this is not very deep in seed, I use the small leaf flake like Knock here. And then down at the front, especially on larger trees and at the front edge, I've been using Selkirk leaf, but I'm going to run short of that stuff eventually. So I need a source. I may have to try to find somebody who's making a larger leaf flake like that would be appropriate for O scale trees, because what I'm building, true scale HO scale trees that are, 12, 13, 14, some of them 15 inches tall, I need the larger leaf flake at the front. If I have deeper seeds, like on the layout that's down at eye level on the main layout, the deepest seeds are ground foam on the back trees, because as the trees get farther away from you in real life, they get fuzzier and you can't see the distinct leaf flake. So I'll use ground foam and then the smaller leaves, and I'll blend toward the front.
Ralph says the tree material you're using sedum.
Sedum. That's the ticket. Thank you. I can never think of the names when I don't plan for that. Yeah, sedum. And it makes great canopy filling trees. One is it gives you some diversity. Let's see if I can zoom in on that a bit. But it gives you some diversity of tree, because super trees all look all the same. They all look like oak trees, and you need some diversity in your tree structure. So I've got some. I got a couple pine trees stuck in there. Those are just wire pine trees. Keep in mind, this seed doesn't have any of my really large trees on it, other than maybe this guy over here is about 8 inches. This section of module goes up above your head, goes up at 78 inches or 80 inches off the floor. So there's not super large trees on here. We weren't really covering trees in this one anyway. But I've got some of that kudzu along the edge because kudzu takes over everything. I've got some of those vines growing along the floor that are made from that, that are pulled apart from that natural material. I have better luck with natural material in general. Like super trees are a natural material that I'm attempting to grow now.
Yeah, that kudzu's vicious. It's an invasive species. It's not. I don't think it's native to the United States. It's
Yeah,
probably
Asia, or I thought it was South America or somewhere. But they
somewhere.
brought it in here and it took over.
Yeah, and it's totally taken over some areas. I mean, we've got an area here in town where the whole hillside is nothing but that kudzu, and it's climbing telephone poles and everything.
A foot in 24 hours. Something. That's kudzu's a necessary thing, and that's the key. You know, the same as Ralph would tell you when it comes to weathering. The key to modeling most of this stuff is getting photographs and looking at what's in the real world. And it's amazing the things that I grew up in the mountains, and I know them well, and I still didn't. What I would have modeled would have been very cartoony, for lack of a better description, in the absence of actually looking at forest. One of the key things that I noticed is you cannot take model trees and shove them close enough in order to emulate the density of the forest. So what I do along the edge of the forest is take a whole lot of just natural sticks and stuff that I'll use that don't have material on them. I'll take, natural stick material, and I'll plant a bunch of those. I'll plant 5 or 6 of those to every tree, and then I'll shove my super trees down over top of that. So when you look up through the forest along the front edge, there will be trees every half inch apart, but you'll just have trees that you can only get over 2 or 3 inches. And that gives that forest edge a lot more trunk structure than what you would have. You also along the edge where the sun can get to, you have a lot of small bushes and kudzu and vines and shrubbery. You need all that stuff. Now, once you get into the density of the forest, that's not as much true. You have a more clear forest floor where you can see it. That's where I save the scraps off from natural root material, and even those little pieces make a lot of the little branches and stuff that should be laying on the forest floor. You could buy a kit from Scenic Express that basically is that. But I think that covers the most of my thought on 3D scenery beyond trees. We're going to get more into trees in the last episode this season, talk more about forestation and trees and the various choices. But we just wanted to cover bushes and shrubbery and everything that goes from the dirt up to trees, structures, and stuff that makes, and 3-dimensionality, I think, is the key to making the believable scenery that we see so much more of here lately.
I believe that's the basically all we've got. Ari, was there any questions in the chat that you've seen?
No, there was the one about what Andy used for his canopy cover, but I think he covered that pretty well. So
diversity is the key to that. If you can find some other natural material, I know some people who use another flowering plant that looks like a branch structure, and I started before I found out about sagebrush or found a way to get sagebrush that I use for large trees. And I found some sticks that look like trees, and if it looks like a tree, if it looks like a small tree, that and some super tree material will make a canopy. And diversity is key. But you've got to look at where you're modeling. If you're modeling the Pacific Northwest, where just about everything is a conifer, then that's going to set your location to your viewers or for yourself. Whereas if you're modeling Appalachia, it's largely deciduous trees. There's some Scots pines, some white pines, some black pine. Nobody needs to become an expert on this stuff, but just look at the pictures.
Ralph says super trees are made of seafoam plant.
Seafoam. I've got some of that planted. By the way, I planted some last year in some big pots so I could bring them in. But we'll see how that works. We'll see if I get some plants off this coming year, because I use so much of it. I've used, I think, 3 or maybe 4 of their large $150 boxes so far, and at my current rate, it would take me about 8 boxes per level the peninsula that I've been building right now, my estimation says that would take about 4 boxes to do, about $600 plus everything else that it takes just for those. So I'm hoping to grow that in some volume.
So, and as always, pictures are your friends, whether you're doing rock work, scenery materials, rail side industries, whatever. Pictures are always your friend.
And color is the hardest thing in the world for a guy that's not artistic like me to pull off, is getting that color right. It's the one thing I don't think I've got exactly right yet. When I've done trees before, and I'll show you at the end, is I use some natural acrylic-based spray paint that's used by florists. I just didn't bring it in here to show you guys, but I use some of that for painting the trees to try to blend the color a bit more than it does naturally, because forests are somewhat consistent. They have a bit of variance in color. You need to get that right, but it shouldn't be so stark of difference the way you see a lot of people model autumn or fall, is that it's very stark difference in colors. And it's what I see in the real world does not tend to be so dramatic of differences. So uniformness, and the backdrop is going to set the tone. If you are painting your backdrop, you need to do that first. Probably, unless you've got modules much like I do, and you need to try to bring those colors together. Or if you're doing photo backdrops, at least look at real photos before you get to your backdrops, like I'm doing, to try to get my colors right, so that when I use photos, those colors will somewhat come together. So
I believe that's
that'll cover it for the 3D stuff.
I think about cover it for this episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, this has been episode 7 of the Railroad Empires, how we're building them. Our next show will be with Big Bill. Who's Big Bill talking to is on the 27th. Coming up on Wednesday. Then Johnny's got his Model Train Talk show on 28th. And then we'll have a show again on the 30th, which will be this is episode 6 of our series. We'll have episode 7, which will be weathering. Weathering the storm of weathering.
And we're going to have a roundtable discussion with Ralph, obviously. We're not going to have a discussion about weathering and not have Ralph in to do that. We're going to have a discussion with people who don't currently weather, some that may not choose to weather or who are not currently weathering, and others who do. And we're going to talk about the decision process that goes into, do you want to make those $200 and $300 locomotives dirty? And, what may you need to do to prepare the skills for it. But we'll get some opinions from people who are not currently weathering their stuff, and from guys like Ralph, myself included, that strongly believe in weathering. And you can kind of help make your mind up as to whether you want to go down that road or not. So look for that next Saturday. Then, of course, we'll see you on Johnny's, and I'm looking forward to Big Bill's show on Wednesday, as always.
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for watching.